It's lesson 2, part 2. We've set up our bookstore, we've pushed it up to GitHub, and we've looked at making a controller with a new method and view. So we're going to go ahead and add some stuff to our view. First thing we'll do, if you notice, we don't have any page title here. So if this says homepage and then our site name, this says privacy, register. But when we went to categories and loaded our new view, we don't get anything here. So we should define this for our view. We're going to go to our new view. And we're going to set up, there's an object called view data. It's actually very similar to the view bag. And if we set the title, if we give it a title attribute of shop our store, this should then set a value in our browser tab. And this is important for search engines. Okay, what did I do wrong? Let's see. Not quite right. Oh, I need the brackets, the brackets around it. So instead of a single line, I've got to put it in brackets. So I've got @ in the curly braces. And now our page title shows up here. So it says shop our store and then a dash, and then it's got the project name after. We can see that in the layout file. So you can see on line 6, we've got our view data, our title property, and then we've got this hyphen, the last chapter, that appears on all the pages. So this part's static, it's on every page, and then the individual page titles show up at the start. So we're going to do 2 versions of this page. The first version, we're just going to kind of hard code a little list. And then later on, we're going to rewrite the page and make it dynamic using a model. So I'm going to put on a UL. Did we talk about Emmet last week in class? Or was that that may have been in one of my other sections. Can't remember if it was Monday or Tuesday. Okay. Does anybody know what Emmet is? So I want to spend a minute talking about it and showing it to you if not. Emmet could be a person. Okay. So it was my Tuesday section, and I guess it had somebody showed up. So Emmet is an HTML coding shorthand. So I'm going to show you the way this works. Now, it's built into code editors like Visual Studio Code, but it doesn't come preloaded in Visual Studio. So I'm going to show you, just going to spend a couple minutes talking about Emmet because it's a great time saver. And I know most programmers try to do things as efficiently as possible. So if I wanted to put a UL tag on here, right, I can do this one of a couple ways. I can open an angled bracket and type UL, and Visual Studio closes it. Emmet is a coding shorthand, so I'll show you how to get it in Visual Studio, and I'll also show you a resource in a minute where you can learn more about it. So I've already got Emmet installed in my Visual Studio. I will show you how to do it in a minute. So in this case, if I type just UL, notice I haven't included any angled brackets. If I hit the tab key, Visual Studio writes the brackets for me as well as closes the tag. Now this is a fairly simple example. But I could also do something like this, ul.myClass, and hit tab. And then it will generate this HTML. So it will automatically write out the class, the equals, the single quotes. So this saves us time. It also reduces typing errors. with angled brackets, quotes, and things like this. So there's a great little tutorial. I'm going to put the link in the chat that you can check out on LinkedIn Learning. So you can access LinkedIn Learning with your Georgian credentials. So this shows you how Emmet works. You can also nest a whole series of tags in this shorthand and it will spit out the HTML that you need. You don't need to do the whole thing, but maybe just even watching the first and second chapters, which is like a half an hour, will save you lots of time. So I will show you how to get Emmet if you want to play around with it in Visual Studio. In your extensions menu, you have this option called Manage Extensions. And if you search for Emmet, it doesn't show up for me because I've already installed it, but it'll show up in this list. You can download it, and then you just click on Install, and it will force you to restart your Visual Studio. Doesn't take very long. You don't have to do this right now. This is totally optional, but a lot of students find it really saves time and errors and improves their accuracy with their HTML coding. So you can download it through the extension menu, restart Visual Studio, and then you get stuff like this. So I would recommend checking out that LinkedIn Learning tutorial. Your semester's probably not all that heavy right now. So it's a good way to save time. And I will use some of the Emmet coding shortcuts in my HTML. That was just a brief aside. I thought I would mention it because somebody did raise it in one of the other classes, I think last Tuesday. Student mentioned it. So I'm going to type a UL and hit tab, and now I get this little unordered list. And I'm going to create a few items in the list. So I'll put on an LI. Oh, yes, Megan, you can nest it. So you can nest a whole series of tags. So something like here. So if you want to do child, you can do UL greater than LI times 3, or this. And then it will generate the whole tag. So I'll do that. So UL greater than LI, I'll do times 3 and hit tab. And then it gives me a UL tag with 3 list items. So it's more efficient, and we're guaranteed that our tagging is correct. So in here, let's just start out with this. Category 1, Category 2, and Category 3. So I'm going to hard code 3 items in this list. We're going to redo this later with some dynamic data, and then we'll move it into our database in a couple of weeks, but not today. So now our page looks like this. We've got a simple bulleted list with 3 items in it. Wording, yes, we are. So now we want to make these links clickable. So we're going to wrap these in HTML anchor tags, and we're going to use the MVC syntax. So I'm going to put this So I'm going to put on an anchor tag. I'm going to use the ASP controller directive. So we're going to use our categories controller. Our ASP action will be called browse. And then I'm going to move my closing anchor tag over here. So if I reload the browser, category 1 should now be a link. Category 2 and 3 will still just be static list items, but category 1 is now wrapped in this anchor tag. Which it is. I can now click category 1. It doesn't take me anywhere. I get a blank screen, but at least it's clickable. I'm going to do the same thing. I'll copy that anchor tag. We'll place it in front of both category 2 and category 3. So now all of them are links. So now I can click any one of these. I'm going to show you one other little useful tool when we're editing HTML files. We're editing views in Visual Studio. Visual Studio has some neat formatting tools. So if I kind of do this, let's say I'll put in a line return before all of my anchor tags. I can highlight either this block of code, or I could actually highlight the entire page if I want. And if I right click and choose Format Selection, or if you're a keyboard shortcut person, Mason, yes, they not currently. We'll fix that. We'll do that in a minute. We're getting there. We want to format them as links first. So if I click this Format Selection, notice it will nest. It'll indent all of my anchor tags. It'll indent them so I can clearly see what's inside each list item. So it makes our HTML more readable. Or if let's say I have no indenting at all, oops. So if I don't indent my code at all, which is not good practice, it's much harder to read. Again, I can just highlight that section, choose Format, and now it nicely nests each HTML tag with indentation. So this makes our views a little easier to work with, a little easier to read. Okay, so Mason raised a good point. Megan, how did you, tell me, what did you have in mind? I'm not quite sure what you're thinking. How would you want to change the format? Well, it indents where there's nesting. So this is not nested in anything, so it's going to be left aligned. If let's say I had this inside a div tag, then yes, the formatting would nest it. So by default, the default formatting is everything is left aligned except where tags are nested. They're indented. That was because I put a line return here. So for example, it's not gonna like this is okay. If I do it like this, it won't reformat. It doesn't move things to new lines. Typically, it simply does the indenting. So if I try to format this, notice it leaves line 7 as it is. But I want it to be consistent, so I'll nest them all the same way. Much more readable. So Mason, we're coming to your question, which is a good one. We can click our links, but why are we getting a blank screen here? So notice the URL, categories browse. How come our screen is blank? And actually, if I inspect, right, if I go to my network tab and refresh, notice we get a 404. Yeah, that's right, Chris. So it's trying to call categories browse, but in our controller, no one's home. There is no categories browse. So what do we need to do to fix this? How do we get rid of the 404? Yep. So Chris and Adil, we need both those things. We need a browse method in the controller, and we need a browse view as well. So we'll create a method called browse that will return the view. So exactly the same as the index method, just with a different name. Call it browse with a capital B. Pardon me. If we try this again, what's the result going to be? What are we going to see in the browser now? We now have a browse method. So what will a refresh do for us? Yeah, Ivan, what's the error going to be? You're right, it will error out. What's the error going to tell us? Yeah, there's no view, not index. You're right, it's going to say there's an error, there's no view. What's the name of the view that it's going to look for? You got it. We have an index view, but we now need a browse view. So if I refresh, we now see the same error we got previously, view not found. It's looking for views, categories, browse. So this is no longer a 404 error. Notice the URL, it now gets handled. It gets properly handled by the controller. So it's not 404, it's just a 500 error. It's an internal server error that there's no view. So now let's go ahead and add the view, just like we added the index view. We'll right-click our browse method, choose add view. We're going to choose Razor View Empty. And Razor is just the name for Microsoft's view syntax. So that's a combination of standard HTML, and then we use the @ symbol to represent server-side code. So Microsoft calls that templating schema designed Razor. So we're going to pick an empty Razor view. We need to call it browse with a capital B so that it matches the method name. Again, the file extension will automatically be assigned, so you don't even have to add .cshtml. We'll automatically get that extension. So just put in the word browse as the file name and click add. If we go back, we now get a 200 OK response. It loads correctly, but there's nothing here, right? Our view is empty so far. So we'll put in a page title that shows up in the browser tab. Say have fun browsing. We'll say you are browsing. So now something should, now it loads, right? Our page title shows up here. And it says you are browsing. So we can click any one of these links. Now, right now, we don't have any easy way to get to the list of categories, do we? The only way we have to get here is to actually, we have to know this URL exists, and we have to type it in the address bar. So how would we make this easier so that somebody comes to the site can actually find the categories page? We can't expect they're going to know the URL and type it in the address bar. So how are we going to get here? Yeah, let's go to the layout. And let's add a link in the nav bar. Exactly. Thanks, Adil. And Mason, exactly what I was thinking. Now, realistically, we could add a new link in here. I don't really think we need to. We already have a privacy link here. No production website has a link to the privacy policy in the main navigation bar, right? We've already got a link to the privacy policy down here in the footer. That is sufficient. So instead of adding a categories link over here, we're just going to rename the privacy link and change where it goes. So let's go back. As Mason said, let's go back to the layout file and let's modify the privacy link here. So it'll say categories and it will load our categories index instead. So we'll go to layout. Our privacy link is down here on line 25. So we need to make 3 changes to this line of code. What 3 things do we need? What 3 values here should we change to convert privacy link in the nav bar to a categories link? Yeah, okay, so Mason, what should the action be? Yep, Adil, you're right, we'll have to change the controller as well and the link title. So let's start with the ASP action that I've highlighted. We're going to take out privacy. What are we going to replace it with? What's the method or action we're going to call from this link? Nope, we're not going to call browse. Okay, yep, Megan, there's no method called categories. Okay, so we have to be clear about the ASP structure. Good guess. So Christopher, you've got it right. We are calling the index method. We're calling this method. So we're calling index on both. Right now, both say ASP controller is home. So what does the ASP controller have to be on line 25? So there's 2 different index methods in the project. Which controller are we executing on the second link? The first link is calling the home controller's index method. So Megan, you were close. Right. We are calling. So we have 2 index methods. The home controller has an index method. So the home link calls this one inside of home controller. The second link also calls an index method. So we can have methods with the same names as long as they're in different controllers. So the second link is also calling the index method, but this time it's calling the index method of the categories controller. And then what should the text say on the link? We don't want it to say privacy anymore. So we want our link to also say categories. So 2 different index methods in 2 different controllers. Home controller is for the first link, categories controller for the second link. So Adil, we don't want to call browse from the nav bar. The nav bar should take us here. So we're on the home page, we go to categories. First, we have to click a category from the list. And this will take us to the browse page. Okay, so this is mostly working now. We can click on categories. We can click on any one of these, but this still isn't quite complete. It's functional, but it's not really very useful. What's missing here from this process? I mean, the links work. They don't throw errors, but there's something else we should be doing with these. what do you notice when I click any one of these links? I click category 1. Okay, yes, Chris, that's true. We could add a back button, but probably even more significant than that, Adil, you're getting warmer. So we've given the user a choice of 3 categories, but no matter what category they click, yeah, Luke, that's right. They just go to the same place. So we don't know when we get to this page, we want to show, like if we want to show which category they picked, we don't know what it is, right? They get the same exact result each time. Yeah, so Chris, that was kind of what I'm thinking. Let's add here the category that they clicked on. So in order to do that on these links, we need to pass a parameter to the browse method. So when we call browse and display this page, we can interpret which link the user clicked and then display it as part of the page content. So this is a 3-part process. First thing we're going to do is modify the links on our index page. So we've already got an ASP controller, an ASP action. So this is the same, right? We're calling the same method in the same controller for every link. But now we need to add a parameter, a unique value on to each one of these links. So when the browse action is called, we know which link the user clicked, category 1, category 2, or category 3. So here's how we're going to do that. I'm going to add an attribute called ASP root, and then I can define a variable here. Right? Visual Studio says define any additional parameters for the root. So I'm going to define a parameter called category. And on the first link, I'm going to give it a value of category 1. Okay, so I'm adding this. I'm going to add similar parameters to the other 2 links. It's going to show you how this works. So you can see the code change on line 8. So now when I go and click category 1, check out the URL. It goes to browse, but then it passes in a parameter called category with the value of category and 1. If I click category 2 or 3, right now we're missing that parameter. These are just calling the browse method, but they're not passing any information in for that method to work with. Right now, only category 1, only the first link has this extra piece of information on this parameter that we're seeing at the end of our URL. So we want to add this same ASP root category parameter to our other 2 links. So I'll give the second one, obviously, a value of category 2. So this is going to be a 3-step process. So step 1 is adding this parameter onto each of our links. So they're all calling the same method, but they're each passing in a different parameter value. So now I can go back and click any one of my links. And it will show me on the browse page, I can see from the URL, which link did I click, 1, 2, or 3. Okay, so this was step 1 in us being able to show on the browse page what category the user clicked on the previous page. So step 2, excuse me. Yeah, if you're in Chrome, the %20, that's just HTML encoding for a space. If you try this in Chrome, it'll show that doesn't matter. So in Chrome, you get this. The %20 just represents a space. It's possible to encode it. We don't really need to. So don't worry about it, Adil. It's not a problem. So now we're going to need to modify our browse method to accept a parameter with this exact name. The name has to match exactly. So we're going to add a string parameter to the controller method. So we're going to go back to our categories controller. So far, all the methods we've worked with have not used any input parameters. String. So we're going to define that when browse gets called, we're also going to pass in a value called category. Display the category using the viewBag object. So we used the viewBag last week, just a simple object for displaying simple messages. I'll define a variable. So before we return the view on line 20, we're going to take that input parameter and stick it in a variable with the same name so that that's available to be displayed in the view. Okay, so we've modified the method header by adding a parameter, and then we're passing that value to our view by using the viewBag object that we worked with last week. So that's step 2. Step 1 was modify the anchor tags to include the parameter. Step 2 was to add the parameter to our method and pass the value to the viewBag. So now we've got to modify the browse view so that we can display our viewBag category, which I think is what Chris, you were suggesting. We want to show that the current link that was clicked somewhere on the page. So it doesn't just say you are browsing. It should say you are browsing category 1 or 2 or 3. So go back to browse, and I'll just add an H2. Now we can output our viewBag category. So we can use this parameter, this ASP root and the parameter, so that we can pass a value from a link from one page to another. So now when I click category 1, browse tells me we're looking at category 1. Category 2 works the same. Category 3 as well. Okay, so we had to make changes in 3 separate files to add this functionality. We had to modify our categories index. By adding these parameter values. We modified the method to accept an input parameter. We've added it to the viewBag, and then we've rendered it in our browse view. So this is how we could click a link, pass data to another page using this process. We could also add a little bit of kind of like error handling, not really full error handling, because I could do something like this, right? I could click on a category, takes me to browse, which is correct. It passes in this parameter value, and it renders it on the page. So this is working. There's no parameter. So the parameter was here, adding this to the anchor tags. So adding this ASP root category, that's what adds this to the URL, which we can then parse in the browse method. Does that make sense, Megan? Okay. So now I'm on browse. It's passing in category equals category 2. It shows me the H2 tag. But what if I do this? What if I wipe it out? Now I just get this. It says you are browsing and there's nothing here. Or if I take out that parameter altogether, this isn't very useful because if someone is trying to select a category, if they change the URL, they don't see anything. So we could add a little logic in our browse method that checks, well, what if the category is empty? If the category is empty, maybe we just want to take them back here. So if category empty, redirect to index, so user and first pick a category. So before we do this stuff, we can evaluate. So if it's null, so far the only types of results we've been returning are views. In this case, we're going to use a different type of return statement. We're going to return a redirect to action. So if category is empty, we're going to exit the browse method by redirecting and calling the index method instead. So if there is no category, the user cannot see the browse view. They get taken back to index instead. So let's see how this works. Okay, so I've added this block from line 19 to 22. I'll first choose category 1. And our browse view loads correctly. It shows me category 1. But if I take it out, now our if statement catches this and it kicks me back here. So there's no way to get to browse if category doesn't exist. So it works without this little if statement, but it works better having the if statement here. If we want to ensure the only way the browse page loads is if we have a category. Any questions? Okay, how are we doing on time? 2:45. Okay. So we'll do make one more quick addition to this before we take a break, and then we'll finish that in the third hour of class. We won't need a full hour for part 3. I'm going to go here for a second. Take a look back at our MVC structure that we looked at in week 1. So far, we've started using this pattern. We make a request to our server URL dispatcher, which hands the request to a controller. The controller does some logic and returns a view. So we've been kind of doing this process, but we've left out the model so far. we sort of started with the controllers and views. So we're going to add in a model for today. Now, we're not working with the database yet. We'll start that in 2 weeks, but we can mock up some data in memory using a model. So we're going to quickly create a model class, and then after we take a break, we'll integrate the model into this process. So in Solution Explorer, we're going to right-click our models folder. Now, there's no template for a model. We just use the add class option. So right-click models, choose add a class. And much like in Java, model names are singular. And again, they should start with a capital letter. So we're going to call this category. You don't need the .cs extension. It's assumed. So again, right-click your models folder, add a class, call it category, singular. So this just looks kind of like a similar class to what you would have created, what you would create in Java. The namespace is models because we're inside the models folder. So we want to define 2 public properties of the model. And there's a couple things to keep in mind in terms of naming conventions with classes in .NET. The first one is primary key fields should always be called either model and then ID with a capital I. So if you create a class with a property that's either called ID or the model name and then the ID, Visual Studio will automatically know this field uses an integer and the values are automatically assigned by the database. So let's create public int called category ID. And like you would have done in your Java classes with Jarrett, the property should be readable and writable. We'll make just one other property, which will be a string. And again, all our property names should always use Pascal case. If you try to use other casing, Visual Studio is going to complain. Right? Naming rule violation. So use all caps. Okay, so here's our simple model. We'll work with models. We'll focus on models in the database in a couple of weeks, but we're just going to do a really simple example for now. Okay. So our model is set up really simple. A public model, 2 properties, the primary key field, that's the model name with the word ID appended on, and one other property, both that start with capital letters, and they both properties are readable and writable. Yeah, Adil, Microsoft has done this. I mean, I started working with Visual Basic in, I think, 1998. And even back then, this was Microsoft has used Pascal case forever. They've never used camel case for naming objects. They'll use camel case for instance variables, but not for object properties, methods, classes. They don't do that. They never have. Okay, I'm going to push this stuff up to GitHub. So I'm going to make one more commit. So I'll go to Git changes, say lesson 2, part 2, category model. And I'm going to commit and push, and then we are going to take a 10-minute break. So commit and push. So all the code we've done so far is up on GitHub now. I need to let the puppy out again. So we will take a 10-minute break and come back at 3 and integrate this model into our app. We'll be back shortly.